Well, thank you so much, Hope. It's great to be back. I just love all of you, and I'm really appreciative of being able to, zoom in. And, we are at, I mean, I guess every moment is an interesting moment, right? We can make it interesting, but we are at a time of transition right now. We're sort of in an in-between place on many levels. We're just getting used to daylight saving time, right? That whole thing is very unnerving, isn't it? And we're on our way. We were just talking before we started recording about the fact that we're heading toward a full lunar eclipse. And Venus and Mercury are doing a little dance, right? They're in retrograde right now, and they're going to have this close encounter with the sun. So, yeah, the stars are ever speaking on top of the whole volatile world situation, which we don't need to get into. It's all right there. It's all right there. And seasonally as well. This time of year is all about change, hope that change is coming, that spring will arrive. Hope springs eternal. So we're way past the winter solstice. We're living into the promise of spring, on our way toward the vernal equinox. And these transition times can often feel uncomfortable, right? Like it's like when a wisdom tooth is cutting in, right? It's just, oh, hurts kind of good. But it's really the perfect time to ask ourselves what we want to grow, what we want to foster into ripeness. This is the time to really plan the garden of the future now. So this concept of past, present, and future, it's interesting, isn't it? This powerful trinity. It's never really linear, right? They're always weaving in and out of each other. And so in thinking about this weaving, we come together this evening to follow the evolution of human consciousness. And we can begin by exploring the idea of providence. Now, this is a word that, I don't know, it's not really used much these days, but it means to have foresight, to foresee. And it provides a precaution. It's kind of like a forewarning, and it provides a protection. The dictionary defines it as the protective care of God or of nature as a spiritual power. I really like that. So I want to use this notion of providence to tap in to the idea of destiny. And tonight we're going to really trace the ancient archetypes of fate from the past to look at how that informs the now and to explore how we can consciously move into the future. But first, let me ask, what is your worldview? Do you perhaps give credence to the notion that fate is written in stone, right? It's designed out of necessity. Or the belief that even if we could, put all the spindles away, if we are destined, we will prick our finger. Or maybe you ascribe to the idea that there are alternate realities, an array of outcomes happening at the same time. Or like when we go somewhere, we could take the highway, we could take, a main thoroughfare, we could go down the side streets. Gosh, and what if we take a wrong turn? Is there such a thing as a wrong turn? And I just spoke about this inevitability of the seasons, and yet in our time, with the reality of climate change and global warming, we can question whether spring will indeed always follow winter. Or maybe you think, well, gosh, you know what? Everything's random. It's just random. It's pure chance. Or maybe you're of the school that says, nope, it's all up to us. That we have complete control. We have freedom of choice. That life is what we make it. And what about coincidence? Right? We were talking about that before we started recording as well. Right? These serendipity events, right? And the idea of chance. A lot to ponder. So we can ask also, who did I come here in this life to meet? And then there's, this ever popular question of, why do bad things happen to good people? This picture, William Blake does this great job of showing Job, the trials of Job. So yeah, we can ask, what about this, the ever-present help of the spiritual world? And what about karma? Yeah, this idea of, what is illness? What is karma? And we can also ask, is justice blind? Does fortune smile? Right? And one of my favorite questions is, what are my prenatal pictures? Right? What did I sign up for? What did I come here in this life to do? And how can I create my highest destiny? So to give a perspective of how far we've come and where we're going, this chart by Rudolf Steiner shows the evolution of human consciousness, which, we can't hope to take this journey in one evening. But we can see where we are right now. And you can see there, this red X kind of marks the spot of where we are right now. We can follow the line back, and we can follow it forward into the future, acknowledging and learning from the past. And, I wanted to just share that a lot of the foundation for the leading thoughts that I want to share tonight are coming from 6 lectures given by Rudolf Steiner during the Holy Nights of 1913. And this series, Steiner unfolds our search for the meaning of existence, basically, by examining the progression of human consciousness. He discusses Zarathustra, the Sibyls, astrology in ancient Egypt, the poets and philosophers in Greece and Rome, as well as the Hebrew prophets. So these lectures culminate in an esoteric background to the Parsifal story, with a discussion on how to behold the imagination of the Holy Grail by reading the starry script in the sky at Easter. So, I think you can tell I really love this series, because Steiner, he lays out the pronounced transition in human thinking, feeling, and willing. And in particular tonight, we will come face to face with the 3 fates, the personification of destiny, celebrated and worshipped by many names in many traditions. So we have the Greek Moirae, Nordic Norns. In Scandinavia, we have what are called the Weird Sisters. Have you worked with these guys? These Weird Sisters. It's interesting because the etymology of weird translates as the word. So this is an ancient form of the logos, seen as coming from the realm of providence. So these are some of the energies we're going to work with tonight. But we're just kind of moving through a quick thread here, and we move into the Greek philosophers, right? Plato called the fates, quote, the daughters of compulsion. And with the fall of Troy, they were referred to as the daughters of chaos. Chaos being the primordial void which predates all existence. So some powerful energies we're going to work with. And in mythology, we hear about the, quote, daughters of necessity. And in fairy tale, maybe you've met the maiden crones of giant land. Right? The kind of gruesome ones down at the bottom. And later, we're going to see how these half divine, half human entities become more embodied, more human, personifying the subconscious soul forces of the Sibyl, for instance, who became activated to perform as an oracle. So from medieval Europe, in Shakespeare's Macbeth, we have the harsh spinners. That's what he calls them. And then continuing, we're moving closer into our time. Through the Judeo-Christian tradition, this concept evolves into faith, love, and hope, or faith, hope, and charity. And in the Americas, we see this as an image of a triple goddess, reflected in the naming of a mountain range in Oregon called the Three Sisters, and outpictured in the Native American legend of squash, corn, and beans, right? The three sisters who work together to feed humanity. So, quick run through there, we've reached our present age. So yeah, let's go back in time. Just start with, like any good myth telling should, with a once upon a time on the far side of yesterday, in the fertile land of the Greek Isles, there, upholding divine law, was Themis, the goddess of necessity. And in her time, she also sat as the oracle at Delphi. Now, this is where she met and mated with Zeus to bring forth the morae, the three fates, the apportioners, divine beings, goddesses that weave the thread of life for every mortal and immortal alike, from birth to death and beyond. Now, Zeus, the king of the gods, even though he was their father, was also subject to their power. So that, the fates had to remind Zeus, that old thunderbolt, about that many a time. So, yeah, all the gods feared them. The Greek word morae literally means allotment, a portion, a part, and by extension, the portion or destiny of a life. So let me introduce you to these three sisters. We have Clotho. She's the spinner. Her name means to bend. She appears as a maiden. She spins the thread of life from her distaff to her spindle. Lachesis, who appears as a matron. She's the weaver of destiny. measuring the thread of life with her rod. Her name translates as to obtain. She is the allotter, the caster of lots. And Atropos, the quote, inflexible one, she who cannot be turned. Usually she appears as a crone, carrying the abhorred shears to cut the thread of life at the time of death. So her name means unbending, inevitable, or literally the unturning. It's interesting to learn that in the early legends, all the fates were young. They were young goddesses, with Atropos, the inevitable one, as actually she was the youngest and most seductive of the three. But with the evolution of human consciousness, as the Greek states rose in power and wars increased, there became this fear of death. And Atropos, she who cannot be turned, became the ugliest of the three crones. We can remember that famous quote from the Odyssey, better a beggar on earth than a prince in the realm of the shades, right? So this sentiment points up the fact that compared to the Egyptian civilization that preceded them, which was, they were obsessed with preparing for the afterlife. The Greeks were not. They were all about preserving beauty, right? It was all about the perfect form, not preserving the body after death. And since the consciousness of the human being during the time of ancient Greece was still imbued with the will of the gods, not as fully as in Egyptian times, but enough that the fates were said to lay out a plan for each person at birth that was fixed and unchangeable. There was no thought of individual will. Getting that thing where I can't quite make it move. Let's see if we can do that. There we go. Right, no thought of individual free will. That fate was indeed constructed by using symbols for types of events. And so we'll see this later in the creation of the runes and the other forms of divination. So yeah, we often speak of the fates as writing the book of life. And there's a compelling scene in the Odyssey of Homer that alludes to this concept of spinning fate with words of power. And of course, the Iliad has a number of references to fate. The relation between Achilles and his mother Thetis is strained because of the fact that, well, she's a goddess and she can see what his fated destiny is, but try as she might, she could do nothing about it. So caused a bit of trouble. So I thought now to take my picture, take my face right off of the thing here and just let us hear an ancient invocation from the Orphic hymns to the fates. So I'm just gonna turn away here so that we can hear this ancient invocation. Receive our offerings, O patient More. We give a luscious fumigation from sweet resin. O divine daughters of darkling Nyx, much named, Draw near. Receive our offering, O infinite More, and listen to our prayer. Who in the heavenly lake, where waters white burst from a fountain hid in depths of night, and through a dark and stony cavern glide, a cave profound, invisible abide. From whence, wide coursing round the boundless earth, your power extends to we of mortal birth. We humans, with hope elated, trifling, yet attentive, a race preposterous, born but to decay. To us, you are a seeding in a heavy veil, to sense impervious, you yourselves conceal, when in the plain of fate you, joyful, ride in one great coach, with glory for your guide, till, all complete, your heaven-appointed round at justice, hope, and care's concluding bound, the terms absolved, prescribed by ancient law, of power immense and just, without a flaw. For fate alone, with vision unconfined, surveys the conduct of the mortal kind. Fate is Zeus's perfect eternal eye, for Zeus and More our every deed descry. Come, gentle powers, well born, gracious famed Atropos, Lachesis and Clotho named, ever weaving, ethereal, wandering in the night, untamed, invisible to mortal sight. More, all producing, all destroying, hear, regard the incense and the holy prayer. Auspicious, listen to these rites inclined, and far avert distress with placid mind. Yeah, I get goosebumps when I read that stuff. So potent. In a moment, I think we should enter now into the many layered realms of the Sibyls, as seen through spiritual science. But first, let's take an eternal moment to open our inner knowing, to hear the voice of the oracle at Delphi, and read the three maxims which the fates have engraved upon the temple columns with laconic brevity. We may know some of these, right? The first and foremost, know thyself. A lifelong task, many lifetimes. And next, nothing in excess, right? The middle way. And the third, lesser known or practiced these days, a pledge unkept means ruin is near. I think we're seeing the repercussions of that in the world these days. So if we are to pass through these columns, cross the threshold to encounter the first abode of the Sibyls, we enter the sacred land of Iona, an ancient region of coastal Anatolia. This is in present-day Turkey. And so I wanted to try to live into this place a picture of this place. It was called by the ancients Mount Parnassus, with its sacred Castilian spring. In the ravine, you can picture this ravine at Delphi, where the Orphic Pythia and her priestesses performed their oblations of purification before the oracle giving process. So it was here that the Sibyls held sway, sending out into the world their divinations from that hallowed place. And Steiner describes how their prophecies arose from their budding human subconscious soul regions in conjunction with powerful cosmic and elemental forces working with that potent spirit of place. And so we have to remember, when we're looking back and forward, that this time it was about 2 steps removed from the consciousness of say, ancient India, when humanity was almost completely a vessel for the gods, or even how it was in Sumeria, with characters like Gilgamesh, who were just starting to differentiate. So these Sibyls coming in on the cusp of the Greco-Roman epoch were tapping into their primal psychic depths. They utter all kinds of prophecies, mostly about the future development of peoples and nations. And Steiner talks about how the Sibyl is like, quote, I love this quote, a force of nature that thrusts itself upon the people, what she has to say. She does not wait to be questioned in the matter of the Greek Pythia oracle. No, she steps forward of her own accord, the people assemble, and her utterances about individuals, nations, and earth cycles ring out with overbearing force, far removed from anything resembling orderly conscious thought. It's a force of nature, right? Clephonic, just so powerful. And it's extremely interesting to me that the Sibyls should first appear at Iona around the 8th century, since this was also the birthplace of Greek philosophy. So this painting by Bernardino May reveals this overlap. We're going to be talking a lot about, we're talking about transitions. We're in this overlap right now. A lot of power in these transitional times. And it shows, this painting shows the fates warning Alexander the Great not to enter Babylon. Okay, do not do it. If you go into Babylon, it would mean death. But as fate would have it, he did not heed the warning of the Sibyl or the advice of his teacher Aristotle. And guess what? Yeah, that's where he died. And Alexander the Great, he was one of these kind of personalities, these bridge personalities between the ancient mysteries and Greek philosophy, working as he did with Aristotle. So the Greek philosophers brought a new kind of thinking, very, very different from the Sibyls, right? Based, instead on logic and number. This is a shift in thinking that had to oppose the subconscious utterances of the Sibyls, since Greek philosophy was striving to come from a more ordered soul life, not instinctive, not a directive from the gods, but wisdom gained through their own intellect. This development progressed on into the Roman era. We can think of this, the orderly, regimented Roman armies, right? And we can also recall that always before a battle, the Sibyls were consulted. Right, there's always going to be an overlap. And for many years, we see this, it's really kind of an intermingling of these two forces, these two streams. So history tells us how the Sibyls exert an influence over the Roman poets too. How they especially play into the poems of Virgil. Aeneas, one of his characters, that's what this painting is showing here, he wants to travel to the underworld to meet his father. So he seeks out the renowned Sibyl of Cumaea to teach him how a living man can enter the realm of the dead. This is a popular theme, right? We can think about Faust traveling to the realm of the mothers. And in these images, we see how the Sibyls themselves, even their appearance changes when these two streams mix, bringing a refinement, an enrichment of both streams. Even the intellectuals of that time, they were consulting the Sibylline books, which they turned to for guidance. I love to look at these paintings. It really shows this progression. And we can remember that the Greeks saw the pantheon of the gods in such a way that when they looked out into the cosmic spaces, when they looked up into the light ether, they ascribed spiritual beings to each of the planets, to the zodiac. Apollo, the sun god, precursor to the Christ, emerged in a kind of a distinctive way. When we come to know Apollo on a deeper level, when we look at that first abode of the Sibyls, Mount Parnassus and the Castilian Spring, where legend tells us Apollo came and killed the monster python who was guarding the spring. To the west of the spring, there was a cleft in the earth. And over this, the Greeks built a temple. Why? Well, we know that that's kind of what happens, right? The church is built where the temple was. But Steiner tells us that in this case, vapors rose up out of the cleft. And when the air currents were right, the vapors crept up the mountainside like the coils of a snake, like a python, like a dragon. And in the divinely aligned consciousness of the ancient Greek, there came forth a mighty thought picture of Apollo, the lyrical solar deity shooting his arrows of light, his rays of sunlight at the python as it rose up from the cleft in the form of those turbulent vapors, right? In the form of that python, that snake. And so when Apollo had overcome the dragon snake, a temple was built. And instead of the image of a python, the vapors were envisioned as Apollo entering into the soul of the Sibyl. The Greeks experienced Apollo now living in these swirling dragon vapors, which prophesied to them through the oracle. So Apollo is now speaking through the lips of the priestess. So interesting. We see that the sun god Apollo changed the influence of the Sibyl by sinking himself bringing a solar influence into these depths, into the depths of the Pythian oracle, and speaking through her soul forces. And so as time went on, the place of the Castilian Spring became an important meeting ground for the celebration of seasonal festivals, a place where the sacred rites were enacted. And later, we see the Sibyl gaining a foothold even in Christianity. We hear her voice in Thomas of Celano's hymn, Dies irae, dies illa, solvet saclum in favilla, testi rex David cum savilla. Day of wrath, O day which leads our era into destruction, according to the witness of King David and of the Sibyl. So with David, we start to see a new impulse enter. It's from his lineage that the two Jesus children stem from. And Virgil tells us that the Emperor Augustus Caesar approached the Cumaean Sibyl at the Temple of Vesta and asked how he could be worshipped as a god. Instead, the Sibyl showed him a vision of the birth of Christ, revealing to him, quote, the true God, the king who would come after him, far greater than he, and referring to the Blessed Virgin as, quote, the altar of heaven, indicating to him, in this vision where a church was to be built. So yeah, I love these crossover stories. I think they're, wonderful to see this overlap, and the Renaissance art really, it gives us so much. So we're going to keep moving on. Is everybody feeling good? Good. Okay. So now, in Michelangelo's great paintings in the Sistine Chapel, he portrays not only the connection of the human and divine, right? He also depicts the Hebrew prophets. And what's really interesting is that he pairs them with the Sibyls. I don't know if you've ever really looked at these, in detail here, but Michelangelo gives credence to the Sibyls, contrasting them with the prophets. Through Michelangelo's brilliance, we see the prophet Daniel with the Cumaean Sibyl. Now we could do a whole presentation just looking at all of these details, folks. I mean, please avail yourself, go back to the recording and just really look at the juxtaposition here. It's fascinating. Who are those beings behind them? Look at their different postures, right? The positions of the books. Are they facing just the side of their face? Do you have the full face? And all of these symbols mean something. And look at how buff the Sibyls are. Look at her arms. I'm going to just keep going because there's a lot of them, but there's a lot of detail here. This is Ezekiel, and he's next to the Delphic oracle. We have Isaiah with the Erythian Sibyl, and look at the finger gestures here. So interesting, the way hers is sort of tucked in her garment there. And this one kind of pointing to himself. And the feet, right? The feet are fascinating in all of these. This is Jeremiah and the Libyan Sibyl. I love this one. So beautiful. And Joel with the Persian Sibyl. So as you can see, we're going back in time. Now we're in ancient Persia. Yeah, so much to look at here. So many things. The task of the Hebrew prophets, as you can imagine, was different than the role of the Sibyl. But both brought forth revelations appropriate to their time. So it makes sense that Michelangelo and many other initiate artists put them side by side, comparing notes. They're consulting with each other. I love this one. Just, what are they talking about? I want to know. And yet we know that the Old Testament prophets heralded a new revelation, a new era of human consciousness, which we can call the intellectual soul age, which started with the Greek philosophers, right? And with this new task, again, the prophets had to reject for a time the wisdom of the cosmic as well as that chthonic, elemental, those depths represented by the Sibyls that had to go underground for a time so that they could fully develop their intellects. And again, this shift caused the forces of the Sibyl to be tempered. So it's working on both sides here. The prophets grounded their wildness. You can see a sort of before and after image here. And yeah, many Renaissance paintings show this transition. And so now, instead of being focused on the more primal forces, the Sibyls are even more refined. They're well dressed. They're consulting now with angels. What we're seeing is a transformation that brings the instinctive wisdom of the Sibyl into its right place within the evolving stream, held back for a time, like a stream that goes underground, only to reappear in another time and place, having gathered new forces during the underground phase. Yeah, I don't know if you're like me. I mean, I remember when I was a young person, I used to really be upset about, oh, the matriarchy, It's like everything goes in phases. And when something goes underground, it really does gather new forces to become completely renewed, cleansed of all of the outdated influences, ready to take on revitalizing impulses after the Christ impulse entered the earthly stream of existence in what has come to be known as the Grail mysteries. So under this influence, the Sibylline forces work to fertilize the inner depths of humanity's soul life. And Rudolf Steiner talks about how Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orleans, he calls her the perfect example of a Christ-filled Sibyl. And we come to recognize a progression. There's this progression from the wild subconscious forces, counterpoised with the moral chivalry of the Christic warrior knights of King Arthur's Round Table. Further transformed into the power of conscience, seen in the soul of Parsifal, an individual on the quest for the Holy Grail, another transitional individual, beginning the work of seeking the Christ within. through inner development. So we're redirecting the Sibylline energies through the cultivation of what we call our higher I, right? Our higher self. So now revelations are not revealed unbidden. You have to question that kind of thing. Now, divine revelations must be sought out, consciously tuned into, called into the soul. And like Parsifal, we have to ask the right question to get the right answer. And because of that progression, that evolution, now in our time, we can, in full consciousness, look into what arises from the depths of our own being. Bring it into the light to gain the wisdom hidden there, to activate and manifest our highest destiny. And in freedom, choose to serve the highest good for all. I really didn't want to get too deep into the wonderful legends and the mythology connected to Yggdrasil and the Norns, but there's definitely a parallel there in that culture. We can know that over time, the Nordic Norns too went from being seen as goddesses of necessity to being regarded as guardian angels. So yes, even the gods can evolve. So now in our time, we can listen to that inner voice of conscience and trust that our higher self, our guardian angel, seeking to guide us to our right destiny. We pay attention. Right? We gotta work with them. We have to listen and act. And yeah, we have to continue to work with the gods, our spiritual creators, by rising in our thinking to meet them. This is the cognitive ritual appropriate for our time, where instead of being an unconscious vessel that the gods pour into, which we can all do that work to remember our past lives when that was what we were doing, and feel the energy of that. Now we have to stand in a different place. We have to employ our active will to practice the indications for our inner development that prepares us to become a fit vessel for a co-creation with them. So I put this little slide together here of some of the things that we work with anthroposophy, the 6 basic exercises. So this is a good way to open ourselves up to that work. And I also think it's important to recognize that we have a responsibility to connect with our beloved dead. Those who they want to, they're wanting to help us from across the threshold. So we need to tune into that and bring those energies in. And keep an intention. We really have to cultivate this. We're moving away from blind faith into a conscious way, so that we can begin to understand this idea of Christ as Lord of karma, so that we can heal and shape our karmic relationships. It's up to us. It's our choice to take this up or not. So we can move from necessity to freedom. We can cut the cords that bind us, so that ultimately we can create our true destiny with focused intention and informed free will.